Welcome back to the channel, and today we are taking a look at my top 10 figures from the 90s. Now, growing up in the 90s, we had a ton of incredible cartoons. We're going to go through some of the more iconic ones and some of the ones that mean a little more to me, and most importantly, the ones that had the coolest action figures. Now, you may not agree on all of these, so if I have missed one of your favourites, make sure you drop it in the comments below. There is literally thousands of action figures, so I'm not going to get them all. I'm going to do my top 10 and which were the most iconic in my childhood. So we should start with a few honourable mentions. We're going to start with X-Men the animated series. This was probably my favourite of the cartoons growing up, and probably still now. The theme song was iconic. Wolverine was one of my favourite characters for this show alone, and because of his figure with the retractable claws. Another honourable mention, which people probably think should be higher, although it's technically 80s as well, is the Ghostbusters. The werewolf from this set is a figure, for some reason, I always had in my toy box. It was always there. It's one of the only figures I can remember constantly bringing out and constantly using. Maybe we picked it up at a sale somewhere, but this guy was just always around, so he had to be on my list somewhere. Another honourable mention is Pokemon. Massive for me growing up in the 90s, one of my favourite cartoons of all time, still one of my favourite medias or series. Absolutely love the game, still addicted to them. But the action figures never really took off. Don't get me wrong, you could collect the Pokemon, but they never released action figures like they do now. So for that reason, I couldn't put it on my top 10. One final honourable mention is for The Simpsons. Again, iconic show that I still love today, despite the later series. But I don't think its figures warrants a spot on this list. I didn't really get into them because they came out sort of later in the 90s and they had very little articulation, so weren't really action figures to play with. But they're my honourable mentions. Let's jump into number 10, Toad Borg from Captain Bucky O'Hare by Hasbro, 1991. Now, Captain Bucky O'Hare as a TV show I loved. I can still remember the iconic theme song. Toad Borg, I can't really remember the episodes. I don't really remember this character in the cartoon. I assume he was one of the big bad guys. And I never actually used him to act out scenes from Captain Bucky O'Hare. The only time I would ever use this figure was as a bad guy for the X-Men or the Turtles or other things on this list, which I don't want to spoil. He looked bad. He looked like the perfect villain. So he was used as the head villain in most of my scenarios as a child. And it's a figure that, because of how much I used it, it just had to be on this list somewhere. And number 10 fits perfectly. Number 9, Mummies Alive, Wrath, Kenner, 1997. Now, I can't remember this TV show. I don't remember actually watching it. I know I did, but I can't remember a single episode. And this character, again, it was just a figure that I had around all the time. He had some cool abilities where you could grab his legs together and he would open up, which I thought was amazing at the time. Anything different in an action figure immediately caught my attention, so he had to be on this list somewhere. And the sheer amount of memories I have with this figure, again, he doesn't mean the same to me as something like the Turtles or Ghostbusters or X-Men, but it's a really cool figure, and for that reason it had to be on the list. Coming in at number 8, Men in Black, Edgar, Galoob, 1997. I loved this film growing up. Will Smith was hilarious. It had aliens, mystery, fight scenes, cool gadgets. It had it all for a child. And the figures didn't let us down either. We got a whole variety of aliens and Men in Black agents covered in slime, but the standout for me was the towering Ed the Bug. You could open his stomach and find Kay in there covered in slime, perfectly representing the scene from the film, which was really cool for a figure to do. Coming in at number 7, we've gone for Power Rangers. The figure I've picked is Sockadillo, I think I'm saying that right. That's from Bandai, 1993. Now, the Power Rangers fought a whole host of cool, giant monsters, so it was really hard to pick one out. But I knew I was going to pick out one of the larger figures, made with really sturdy plastic, and just felt great to hold and battle with. For me, this was one of the cooler ones of the show, and it's one that I remember having vividly. I can remember picking it up from a car boot sale, although I have bad memories of Power Rangers as well. We picked up a ton of Power Ranger stuff from a car boot when I was a child, and it was left behind. The woes of being a child. Coming in at number 6, we've gone for Jurassic Park Hatchlings. Kenner, 1993. If I was doing this by most played with figures, it would hands down be Jurassic Park. Me and my cousin would sit and play for hours with these things. We'd create our own dinosaur parks, plan the escape and destruction of my uncle's lawn. We had all of them, but my favourites were the baby versions. They were so unique and a lot rarer than some of the other bits we had, and that always intrigued me. For the most part, dinosaurs felt like the bad guys in our games where they would tear apart other figures. These little guys were always the ones being rescued, so for me they were kind of the good guys of it, which I normally tend to like anyway. Coming in at number 5, we've gone for Small Soldiers, Punch It and Scratch It. Hasbro, 1998. One of my favourite movies of all time growing up. It fascinated me the toys were moving and kicking ass. Everything about the film amazed me, and obviously their marketing department did one hell of a job because I needed these toys. They were quite popular and tough to get here in the UK, so I cherished them when I did. I still have my Chip Hazard from a child in the other room today. I had most of the collection growing up, but Punch It and Scratch It was one I could never get a hold of. I only saw it once in a shop as a child, and it was so expensive at the time we just couldn't afford it. One sour tale of Small Soldiers as well. I was around a friend's house, and I'm a stupid kid, I don't know any better. So he offers to trade me a giant Chip Hazard figure for my Archer. Now Archer is one of my favourites, they're sold out everywhere, but this Chip Hazard is a huge figure and I've never seen it before, so I accept. Later on do I find out, to my nan's displeasure, that this is a shampoo bottle. Coming in at number 4, a little cheeky this one, we've gone for the WWF Ring, Hasbro 1991. Because it isn't technically a figure, it was more something I used for all of my other figures. So it wasn't just for wrestlers, I could hold my own unique figure federations featuring the likes of Stone Cold vs Magneto and Captain Bucky O'Hare vs Donatello. It built my imagination to what it is today. Coming in at number 3, we've gone for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Possibly my favourite cartoon growing up. We've picked Genghis Frog, Playmates 1989. Now you're going to have to let me off on this one, I know it is a year out, but he was probably the most iconic figure for me and one that I always had. Now if you don't remember the character, in the cartoon he's one of the 4 frogs trained by Shredder to face off against the Turtles. Just the thought of there being more of these animals turned into ninja fighting machines blew my mind as a child, and I instantly loved all of them. I'm sure the series, for whatever bizarre reason, only made Genghis, which is disappointing because some of the other frogs are equally as cool, if not better. I mean, look at Attila, a freaking morning star. This was at a time Playmates were making the TMNT stuff, so they came out with some unique and interesting characters. If you've been listening this far, thank you, and make sure you drop in the comments your favourite figure from the 90s or growing up, and some of your stories you had with them. And if you're enjoying the content of my other videos, maybe think about liking or subscribing for more content. Coming in at number 2, we've got Tales from the Crypt. Now this could be Frankenstein or the Zombie. Made by H Novelty, 1994. Now this was released by them, a company who had never made a figure and would go on to never make any more. In complete honesty, I can't remember the characters from the episodes they were in, just the design and how fun they were to play with is etched into my memory. If you don't remember the Frankenstein, you could break all the parts off of him and rebuild them how you would like. The zombie was sort of a luminescent green and you could take off parts of his body. Again, something I really loved for games. For example, like I said, Jurassic Park was one of my favourites. So obviously having arms and things that you could bite off with dinosaurs was so cool. Now the next figure is my favourite, but I will say the Frankenstein and Zombie from Tales of the Crypt are the most iconic for me. They're what I can remember most vividly. But in at number 1, we've gone for Gargoyles, Goliath Power Wings, Kenner, 1996. One of my favourite cartoons of all time. We've never really had anything else like it, but the fact it had different wings to the rest of the set and was such a big and imposing figure, it's always been my holy grail and one I hope to own someday. None of the other figures really come close to it, even the other versions of Goliath, they weren't as big and impactful. The fact the wings could open up and they were made of a fabric, for some reason cloth stuff is just always more interesting in action figures, and this, for me, is the best example of that. If you made it all this way, thank you so much for listening. Those are my top 10 action figures of the 90s. Drop in the comments below what video you want me to do next, but until next time.